Hey everybody, Dan here with Pain Free You. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Alex from LA. And Alex has offered to share his experience with the mind body condition and his symptoms and his journey. And so, welcome, Alex. I really appreciate you.
Of course.
And
It's an honor to be here.
yeah, why don't you take us on a little journey as to kind of what you went through when it started, what was going on, what you went
Sure.
through medically, how you found out about the whole mind body brain retraining concepts, and what really helped you out in that world. And we'll just see how the conversation goes.
Of course. So my mind body journey begins in middle of 2022. I'm on tour as a musician. I'm touring with a few different groups, and I do 2 months back to back of touring around the United States and around Europe.
Cool.
First one was about a month long. Second one was started 3 days later, and it was another month. So the first one was just around the entire United States and Canada, and second one was 2 weeks in the United States, 2 weeks in Europe. So I only set that scene to give a little bit of context as to where my body was at physically and maybe mentally. I feel like looking back, it was more of a physical wear and tear than maybe on my mental health. But again, in that period of time, I also didn't have a very regular regimen for meditation and mindfulness like I had in the past. So there were kind of a lot of things working against me in this regard.
Right.
So the tour, the second tour ends in end of June, just about end of June 2022.
Mhm.
And I was in Europe. The tour actually coincidentally was with my fiance, who she was the background singer and I was the keyboardist and the music director. So we decided that we would extend our trip and that we'd do a vacation, because originally this tour actually supposed to have been in January, but because of COVID related things, they actually had to push it. So we felt, well, maybe this is the world's way of saying that we should do a vacation over the summer in Europe. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that.
Cool.
So we get to see some family friends in Bordeaux. We go to Nice, and then we go to the Amalfi Coast. And we were in Sorrento, and we go on a day trip to Positano. And just a few days before that, actually, going back a little bit, when we were in Nice, we were walking on the boardwalk, and I felt just a little pop in my ear. And I don't really know what happened. All I know is that in about an hour, it felt like there was a balloon in my ear. So that was kind of the first symptom that I had experienced from what has later become this whole mind body symptom experience. And I, to this day, don't really understand what that moment was. And I haven't really had an experience quite like that since. I've had things related, but not quite to this level, where it just felt like there was a balloon in my ear. I went to urgent care in France. I fortunately speak French, but I speak, about like 80 to 90% fluent. So that little 10 to 20% when you're in a medical situation like that, and the nurse doesn't speak any English, there could have been a little bit of loss in translation, but I'm not 100% sure. But what they gave me, essentially, what I understood them to prescribe was, well, we don't know if maybe this is an infection, viral or bacterial, so we're going to prescribe you antibiotics plus steroid. So I was doing both, and they just said, just finish this course and let us know how it goes.
Mhm.
And so I brought that medication with me then to Sorrento, and I was taking that daily at that point. So then fast forward to this day trip to Positano, my fiance has the idea of going on a boat. There's a ferry, it's a nice view. Why don't we do that? So I don't really think anything of it, and I don't really immediately think of, I'm having some ear trouble. Maybe there's a connection, maybe there's not. I hadn't thought of that. Eventually I would have doubts and I would have regrets about that decision. Now that I know about the root cause of what I've been dealing with, I don't really regret that as much, but I just bring that up as something that when you endure what people like us have gone through, you'll regret a lot of the decisions you made thinking that that was the root cause.
Mhm.
So go on the boat. It's unbelievably choppy. I have never done well with motion sickness, so I'm sort of panicking on the boat. Not full panic mode, but not enjoying myself either. So we spend the day in Positano hanging out on the beach, and I don't really think anything of it again. And then we have to get on the boat trip on the way back, and Emily, my fiance, says, well, we can just get a bus if you want to do that instead. And I'm just like, I don't want to cause any problems. Let's just take the boat ride back instead. And just getting on the boat, especially in the dock, it's just this crazy up and down sensation. I mean, it just feels like I'm being sucked in, just like. So then we take the boat trip, we go back to Sorrento, and I don't really feel anything until about later that night. And I remember lying on my bed, and it felt like I was moving about 10 feet up in the air. It was crazy. I mean, it wasn't even the same distance it felt like the boat was itself, but it was just this extremely strong pull in both directions. And I guess I'm not really panicking at that point, but it's just super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So next day, we are about to leave. We're going on our way. We're going to Pompeii, which is a childhood dream to go there. So we walk around. When I'm walking around, I don't feel any symptoms at all. But then when I stop walking, I feel this bobbing sensation again. It's kind of bobbing, rocking, swaying, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And then we fly to Frankfurt. And when we get to Frankfurt, I think I didn't really notice it, but in flight, I don't really feel the sensations again.
Okay.
But then when we land, I walk out and I feel unstable. Again, not catastrophically so, but I do feel that. So we then go, the next day we fly to Dallas. Dallas, via Dallas back to LA. But first stop is in Dallas. And the flight is unbelievably bumpy. Like, I'm sleeping for most of it, but I remember my head kind of just moving back and forth from the sleep. Sure. and how rocky and bumpy the flight was. We land and I stand up and chaos ensues. I stand up about 5 or 10 steps into my getting off the plane. I feel the world is spinning. The world is moving. Like, I kind of have recently been using the metaphor of the hallway scene in Inception, where the room starts to rotate. Yeah. That's kind of how it felt. And on top of that, I also was experiencing crazy nausea. I thought I was going to vomit. I was completely panicked because these symptoms I had never experienced to this level before. I mean, even the sensations that I had felt rocking and swaying, those were 2 days old.
Yeah.
And so for me, this whole thing was it was horrifying. Add on top of that we have to go through customs and security, which is already sort of an anxiety inducing experience anyway.
And
so
now
on
it
top
looks
of
like
that,
you're on drugs because you're
that's how I felt.
freaked out. No, I know.
Yeah, exactly.
Now you're like, how am I going to get through security if I look and feel like this?
I absolutely felt that way. I really, truly did. So then I'm just miserable. I call my parents. I actually remember vividly that I was supposed to have a rehearsal with an artist that I worked with the next day. And I messaged their manager saying, hey, I just got off of a flight and I'm feeling really ill and I don't think I can do this rehearsal. And that would be the first of many outs that I would pull, the cancellations and putting off my job and putting my life on hold. I remember it so vividly. And yeah, that was July 8th, 2022. And proceeded to get on the flight back to LA. I guess I sort of remember that on the flight, the symptoms went away, which was, again, this thing that I would learn over time, that one of the places where I don't experience the sensations is when I'm in motion. So driving.
And that makes so much sense. You want my take on that?
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
All right. So the brain it's programmed, it's expecting things. When you're moving, there's a certain amount of expectation from the brain that you're not always stable. You're getting bumped around, you're flying, you're whatever. When you're in motion, even when you're walking, it's like you're not perfectly balanced. And the brain is constantly aware and adjusting minor foot adjustments, leg adjustments, arms, balance. It expects for you to be slightly out of balance.
Yeah.
When you stand still or sit down, it expects stability. And if it's not there, it goes, holy cow, what's going on?
Yep.
And the brain panics and says,
Yeah.
we're supposed to be stable, but we're not. Panic
Yeah.
at a subconscious level.
Yeah.
I heard a story from a lady, was in my group coaching, where she said she couldn't walk, she couldn't stand still, but she could jump on a bike in a city, swipe her card, and ride through traffic on a bicycle with no problem
Yep.
until she got off and stood next to the bike when she felt like she was going over. Why? Because you're supposed to feel unbalanced on a bicycle. That's the whole thing. You're always off balance, always adjusting and correcting. The
Yeah.
brain is just flipped and says, that makes sense, but wobbly while we're supposed to be stable doesn't. And I think, from that standpoint, dizziness, vertigo, it's completely fascinating,
Yeah.
albeit terrifying.
Yeah. It's certainly it's they're two sides of the same coin when it comes to chronic unexplained symptoms. And I always have felt like pain and dizziness, and a lot of my learning about this world has come through the lens of chronic pain, but I think it applies all the same, which is the root cause, the character traits of people who develop these symptoms, and the mechanism for how they work, I guess, is different. And maybe the way in which you approach pain versus instability and imbalance is maybe just a different process, but I think at the root, they're the same. So I agree with what you've been talking about as far as why the brain responds in the way that it does. And basically I can explain, 30,000 feet view of what then ensued.
Sure.
The first 3 weeks were just, pretty much a nightmare. And I had been just at home back home in Burbank, where we were living at that time. And in our apartment, I felt every time that I stood up and walked around, I was just like gonna fall over. I would take a shower, and for whatever reason, like being in an enclosed space, that would make me feel so much worse. So I ended up showering like once every 2 days rather than every day. So, I already feel kind of gross. I feel kind of dirty, but on top of that, I just feel like I'm sitting down all day and not really pushing myself to do anything. It was about, I would say, 2 or 3 months of not really working much at all. Fast forward 3 weeks from the onset of the symptoms, I went to bed one night and I didn't fall asleep for 2 days straight. I was just in complete fight or flight. And so that began the journey through chronic insomnia, which is much better. Even last night, I was just kind of lying in bed at 3 a.m. being like, when are we falling asleep? Not happened yet. I would say most nights these days, like 95%, I sleep pretty well. And then occasionally just don't. But that's part of recovery. And then, so I've been working through that since about July of 2022, or end of July 2022. And then some more symptoms that I started to experience. Some of them were mind-body related. Others, I think, were maybe medically related. So I'll explain what that means. I basically since then have also dealt with some TMJ, neck tightness, neck pain. Those were other complementary symptoms that I had that don't dominate my existence in the same way that the dizziness and the insomnia did, but are still uncomfortable and not desirable, I guess. And then add on top of that, the first neurologist that I went to go see, because a lot of this story that I'll explain is doctor visits and, the medical field. And the first neurologist that I get sent to, I have an HMO at that time, so I'm sent to the referred neurologist through my primary care. And I'm sure he was trying his best, but it ended up being the situation where I explained to him what symptoms I was experiencing. I think at first he thought I might have POTS. And then, it's like I was dealing with a lot of elevated heart rate and stuff like that. And also, I explained to him the boat experience. And so he said, well, maybe you have Mal de Debarquement Syndrome. So that was a understandable diagnosis. And when I first started experiencing the symptoms, I had read online that that could have been what it was. And so when he said that, as much as I didn't like hearing that there was a diagnosis, maybe there was a bit of me that wanted an answer. And so for several weeks, I had gone without an answer, sort of aimlessly trying things like going to a chiropractor, doing the Epley maneuver, trying to, I wasn't sure if this was like the crystal that had been dislodged in my ear and whether that was my solution to the problem. And believe me, it was not. It gave me a migraine, made my headaches worse. So he puts me on lorazepam for anxiety. And I don't think he actually knew that benzodiazepines are actually a symptom reducer for dizziness. So I start taking lorazepam, small dose, but still taking it daily, and my symptoms start to go away. And I'm just like amazed. I don't know if this is because of the medication or I've just calmed down, or whether this is like my body has just naturally found a way to heal, and I'm thrilled. And so I'm exhausted because I'm still sleeping like 2 or 3 hours a night, even with taking Ambien because of the insomnia. But at least my symptoms are not as bad. So I feel like one thing's getting better, even if the other thing is not great. And I go back to my neurologist and he says, well, you really need to get off lorazepam because it's really bad to take it. And I'm just thinking, well, you're the one who put me on it. I didn't ask to be put on this medication. If it's so bad, I guess this is more my inner dialogue, but like, if it's so bad, then why did you put me on it in the first place?
Right.
And I don't think he understands, nor did I understand at the time, that the lorazepam is really like dulling that network, that since those neurological sensations that are, causing the dizziness. So he tells me like, you should get off it as soon as possible. May have given me a weaning off program, but it was like incredibly fast. And so after this, I'm convinced that this is what it was. I'm not splitting hairs. I really believe that this is what caused it. I then proceed to have 2 months straight of migraines because I later was put on the same medication by a different neurologist, and they gave me a weaning off period of like a way longer time. So I'm convinced that this weaning off period that they gave was so fast that my body was just not used to not having the compound in me. And yeah, that was 2 months straight, like consecutive months of feeling like there was a vice grip on my head. And it was, yeah, I just thought of the scene in Casino with the guy's head being stuck in the vice. And I was like,
all right, we don't have to get that graphic.
Not that graphic, but that's what it felt like.
Sure.
Just for a visual, a disturbing visual, but that's how it felt. So add on top of that, ear clogging and occasional tinnitus. And that sort of covers the range of symptoms that I did experience and then would continue to experience for the next few years, right? Dizziness, bobbing, rocking, swaying. A sensation that I like to explain to people for a little bit of clarity is trampoline floor and TMJ, insomnia, neck and upper back pain, ear clogging, and tinnitus. That sort of covers the gambit.
So
now, yeah, go ahead.
When did you go from medical world to thinking something else may be going on?
Yeah. So to briefly go through the things that I did prior to finding the mind body stuff, I think it's important to showcase because as probably what I would identify as a hyper rational person, someone who believed in modern medicine to be the thing that works for everyone, that I think I needed to exhaust all resources before moving on. So I find a neurologist who is in Los Angeles, and I actually had reached out to Dr. Cha, who's an expert in Mal de Debarquement Syndrome, which is my current working diagnosis. I reach out to her. She's in Minnesota and she doesn't have appointments for months. So I reach out and say, is there someone in LA that I should see for this condition? She recommends me to Dr. Marissa Chang, who is a neurologist, and also, when I met her, find out that she also has my condition. So in her office, in my intake appointment, I break down because I had met someone for the very first time in person who had these symptoms, and that I just felt really isolated and alone. Now, this is January of 2023, so it's been 6 months that I've been dealing with acute symptoms from this condition, and she's the first person I've met who can actually relate to it, not as a practitioner, but as a person. So her role in this story was, I think she did her best and was, again, working with physical diagnoses, with that as a physical diagnosis rather than a psychophysiological one. But she at least made me feel less alone, and I think she was trying her best, and the treatments that we did didn't work. So with her, I tried doing things like Botox injections into my neck. I was doing an fMRI to see how my brain would respond to motion sickness triggers or motion events. We did TMS, the other TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation on my head. This little magnet hits you in the head, sort of like a woodpecker. It's like a dull-beaked woodpecker is pecking your head in increments. And so 2 weeks later, they said, well, you should feel great. And then 2 weeks go by, I didn't feel anything. So a lot of dead ends. I then get referred to a NUCA chiropractor who can do these subtle neck adjustments on my neck, see if that might do anything. Bless her heart, she was a really kind doctor. It's kind of like would give me therapy in certain ways. So like I got something out of the sessions, and she was just like a nice person to be around, but it didn't fix the sensations really at all. I had also been doing, over the course of this time, vestibular therapy for balance, and those didn't really help much either. Sometimes, in fact, it would exacerbate it. Sometimes it would feel better, sometimes it would feel worse. So it didn't actually feel like we were moving anywhere, and I think I knew that. I had listened to one of your other patient stories the other day, Rob, I think it was, and he was talking about how he felt maybe after this many sessions, this is when it was going to start to get better. And so I wouldn't stop. I would just keep doing it because I'm like, well, maybe this is sort of the breakthrough period where I need to do this, and then eventually it's going to get better. And it didn't. So I go to Minnesota to go see Dr. Cha, and they do some brain scans on me. They do a few other things. I don't really get a lot of clarity, and I'm pretty disappointed with how that appointment went. She's a really nice doctor, a really nice person, but I don't feel like I get the amount out of it that I thought I would. There's no revelation or anything. I then go to New York, and there's a clinic in New York called the Mount Sinai Mal de Debarquement Syndrome Clinic. And it's run by this doctor, and he brings me in. I'd been in contact with him for months. This is a highly in-demand clinic for the working diagnosis of Mal de Debarquement Syndrome. I go, I am nervous but excited. I'd been let down a lot at this point, so my expectation is sort of tempered. I'm hopeful that it can work, but I'm also not expecting it to. So I go, I do these eye training exercises where I'm in this kind of black room, and there will be dots on the wall, and I'm basically moving my eyes around trying to recalibrate what they call, I think it's like my visual ocular reflex system.
Okay.
And there's, it's 1 week, it's 5 days in a week. At the end of it, I feel horrible. I mean, I feel like just garbage. I feel much worse. And I'm thinking, oh my God, of course, like I go and I try this thing. And of course I'm the one, I'm convinced I'm broken at this point with the number of treatments that I've tried and nothing is working. I'm like, I'm the problem. That's my mentality that I've gotten into.
Sure.
And I finished the week. I'm really upset, but the doctor says, give it 2 weeks. Let me know how you feel. 2 weeks later, I feel so much better. I don't feel like cured by any means, but rather than in the 7 to 10 out of 10 symptom range, I'm at like a 5, occasionally a 4 or a 5. So
Where were you before you went into that treatment? What level?
yeah, I'd been in the 7 to 10 range the entire time since
Even before you got to him. Okay, so there was improvement.
it was an improvement.
Good.
And I was really grateful for that. So they gave me a virtual program that I could do at home. I borrowed my friend Johnny's virtual reality headset, and which he very generously let me use. And I would be doing the treatments at home because that's what I thought was working. Now, being at home from about July 2023 to November 2023, I didn't really improve any more than I did, but I didn't get much worse. So I was kind of treading water there. And for me, that was an improvement. Like, I was a lot happier. And I felt like, well, eventually I will hopefully continue to improve, and it's just going to take time. I then go to my grandmother's place on Thanksgiving of 2023. And all of a sudden, I'm walking through her senior community's dining hall and I just fall through the floor. It feels like I completely fell through the floor, like 8 to 10 feet. And just like that, my symptoms are back at their previous level, just all of a sudden. No explanation, no real rational reason. It just happened. And I was devastated. And that was the moment where I said, eventually, like not right in that moment, because we were at Thanksgiving dinner and I'm putting on kind of a brave face for my family a little. I'm telling them I feel bad, but I'm not going to make a big deal about this. And then, 2 days later, I say, I'm down for whatever. I'm off the traditional wagon. I'm going to try everything. I had tried to see an acupuncturist before, and so I was open to doing things that I wasn't accustomed to doing before, but I still felt like that was treating the physical affliction, like that would be doing something in my neck or doing something in my body, not related to my brain necessarily. I then get on my phone, I go on a walk, and I had saved on my phone for several months, actually, an episode of the Steady Coach podcast. And I found an interview that was with someone with my MdDS diagnosis. And that interview completely changed my mental trajectory of where I was going. Because Joella, who's become a friend now, her story, it was the same as mine. You know, we were both people who had she had a lot more like childhood trauma. Like I don't know if like I would qualify what I had as traumatic, but I was stressed out a lot as a kid. Sure. I had a very academic, achievement oriented household, and I felt a lot of pressure to succeed with a brother who was highly, highly intelligent. And I felt like the dumb kid in my family. And so I constantly felt a need to impress or people please my way through my life because I wanted people to like me, because I felt like I wasn't as smart and I couldn't get as good of grades as my brother, that I needed to make people like me. So when you do that over time, you end up internalizing a lot of people's microaggression. And what that resulted in me was just a tremendous amount of repressed frustration, anger, and rage. And I don't come across to most people as a rageful or angry person, but that has always been something that I have worked through and dealt with in my life, being a fiercely passionate positive person and also a fiercely passionate negative person. Okay. So I mentioned that just to have a little bit of background as far as when I started reading the literature, I knew that this is what I had. So I listened to the interview. She talks about all the treatments that she tried. She did EMDR, IFS therapy systems. Again, this was new to me, the idea that this was all rooted in the brain. So I'm open to all of it at this point because the other stuff didn't work. So I'm open to everything. So it was like EMDR, IFS, pain reprocessing therapy. I get a contact at the Better Mind Center where I found my pain reprocessing therapist, Lauren, and she no longer works there, but she was an expert. Her specialty was working with people with dizziness. I found a therapist in LA who took my insurance, who did EMDR and IFS, and I start reading other books as well. Like I read the Alan Gordon, The Way Out, and that book was a gift someone had gifted me for a Secret Santa book exchange. And that book was super enlightening because I think reading on paper, just all the traits that make someone prone to dealing with chronic unexplained symptoms, it was a total watershed moment because I went through the list and it said people pleaser, anxious, you know, overly conscientious, type A, perfectionist,
Do-gooder. Yeah.
do-gooder, yeah, all of those. And then also reading through the symptoms in terms of when the symptoms onset, there being stress, also just like that symptoms fluctuate and pain moves throughout the body and how they vary. And there's a lot of like time dilation and also delay. That was those kinds of things were just like, all right, this is what I have.
Connect the dots. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was frustrated. I think in one moment I was super grateful to eventually find it, but you have to keep in mind, this was almost a year and a half into the experience. And I had already lived my life with the symptoms with a lot of regret about like, I should have never gone on the boat. I should have never gone to Italy. I should never have gone on that tour. I lived with tremendous regret about so many things. So of course I'm positive about the fact that I've found these treatments and I'm going to try something new. And if it worked for someone else, really hope it'll work for me. And at the same time, just being remorseful that I hadn't found it sooner.
Well, yeah, you have grief over the time span you lost.
Yep. Yep. And I think what is true is that to some extent, and I've tried to rationalize, is that I think being that hyper rational, logic based person that I was and still am to some extent, that I needed to exhaust all the traditional methods before being desperate enough to try the non-traditional stuff like this, which now is, it's funny when you work in this space now and you start to appraise other symptoms and look at it from the mind body space. It is sort of interesting how you can observe in me, it's not even just dizziness. It's also like certain pain things. And I'll talk about that later, but it really just opened my mind so much to the power of the brain and just all of it started clicking and making so much sense in terms of, I would go to a movie or I would go to some place that's really stimulating. And then a day later I would feel terrible, like in theory, why wouldn't I just feel worse right away? If you go on a boat, like a normal person, or let's just say you go on a boat, when you get off the boat, you immediately feel that rocking and bobbing sensation that you did. I didn't. I felt it hours later. Like that already, I mean, now I'm looking back and reappraising things for how they were back then, but that's just how the brain is working in this situation.
Yeah, delayed reaction. I term that like an activity hangover. It's like the next day you feel stuff, but during you're kind of okay.
Yeah, that activity hangover is very real and felt that a lot at many times. So absolutely can relate to that.
So what else can you tell me?
So I start doing these treatments. I have been, let's see, when I actually start doing them, it's about December of 2023. And I'm doing pain reprocessing therapy with Lauren. I'm doing EMDR and IFS with my therapist, Alex Bailey. And we're kind of tag teaming it, right? I'm doing those therapies. I'm also reading books. I also found your work through this process. Once I had found this mind-body space, I found your stuff. And I think a mantra of yours that became just a central mantra in my recovery process was trying to rephrase and reframe symptoms from, oh no, to, oh well. That really stuck with me. And even last night, I had a little bit of a spike after seeing a movie, and I tried to just listen to your words and just say like, oh, well, so be it.
Because oh
And
no fuels the fear and the danger, and
yeah,
brain's not going to settle down. It's going to stay on alert. So
yep. This perceived danger pain, or in my case,
symptom.
perceived danger symptoms or dizziness, PDD, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
It I really had to work on that because I reflect on how the previous year and a half had been. And what I remember so profoundly was every time I experienced a symptom, I was just, oh God, just aggravation and,
Mhm.
just fear,
Yeah.
true fear, like every single sensation, because I've broken a lot of bones in my life.
Mhm.
And I use this metaphor a lot where when you break a bone, I'd broken this left humerus 3 times. And every time that I broke it, I could hate it. I could hate the fact that I broke that bone the whole time. But it's going to heal because that's how bones work.
Sure.
You can hate the fact that you have a broken bone. It may make the process more
Painful.
difficult and painful to mentally have a blockage like that. But in theory, the bone is still going to heal.
Yes, it will.
With this sensation, with these chronic unexplained symptoms, you cannot hate the symptoms and I know from firsthand that over the time period that I had, that I hated it every day, every moment of the day that I experienced these symptoms. I hated it and I didn't get any better. So it's not the only part of the recovery process that you will need to find peace and find yourself healing, but it's a huge part of it is just being able to not enjoy it. Nobody's asking you to enjoy it, but
Right.
tolerance or acceptance of the
Yeah.
symptoms.
And I've often said you cannot hate your symptoms enough that they go away.
Yeah.
You can't get
Right.
mad at it. I've never met a single person who got so angry their symptoms disappeared. Because
Yeah.
what does the anger and the frustration signify to the brain? Danger. I've
Yeah.
got a problem.
Yeah.
I'm in trouble.
Yep. And then it just perpetuates the symptoms because it
Sure.
thinks Alex is in danger and
Yeah.
it needs to make me aware.
I have a lot of people say, I'm not afraid of the symptoms. I'm just pissed off. Okay. Well, what does that signify to the brain? If the brain is trying to monitor for danger or safety, it says we're in trouble.
Yep.
Right. So, great point.
It's that in and of itself is the most important thing to recovery. And also, I think by far the most difficult. When you've spent that much time hating your symptoms and honestly hating your body, what it really comes down to is just like a mistrust of your body. I think at a deeper level, we look at anger as a secondary emotion and we say, I'm really angry at the symptoms. What's beneath that? And for me, it's like, I just fundamentally don't trust my body to work anymore. At a certain point, you're like, I've been dealing with this for a year and a half. Something has to be broken.
Right.
And when you find the literature of mind body work like yours or the Steady Coach, Dr. Sarno, Nicole Sachs, you will see again and again, you're not broken. Nothing is actually damaged. But when you've spent so much time believing that that's true just because of things not working, it's really hard to undo that.
For sure.
And that is part of why I think therapy helped me a lot. I'd been seeing a therapist throughout the entire process, but it was not geared towards symptoms. It was purely geared towards mental health and insomnia, which again, at those times really helped me. But I think having a framework and having someone challenge me and push me on my beliefs and my ideologies about why my symptoms were there and like whether I'll get better or not and all the fluctuations and improvement and then setbacks, it's not linear. I mean, the recovery process for anyone who's gone through this, I don't think is linear, and it can be exponential. It can go up and down. I think the dream scenario is like you find the mind body literature and then immediately your symptoms are so much better. But even then, that's sort of an exponential improvement rather than it's just going to gradually go down, because what you've done is you've told yourself, I'm not broken, I'm not damaged, and these sensations are uncomfortable or painful in certain situations, but they're not indicative of my actual health. They're just sensations.
Yeah. Yeah, I often find that when they find out about the mind body concepts, they can sometimes have a marked decrease in symptoms. But then what ends up happening is then it kind of plateaus and they go, how come I'm not getting better? I know about this. How come they're not gone yet? What am I missing? Maybe I'm doing something wrong. And then they start to self judge their ability to convince the brain. And then they hit a speed bump when the symptoms jump up. And then they go back into panic because they didn't expect it. It's like, I know about this. Why is it getting worse? What's wrong? And then the doubt shows up again. Well, maybe I really have something wrong. Maybe the doctor's missed something, or maybe this process isn't going to work for me. Maybe it might work for some other people. Maybe I'm too anxious, right? And so what I try to do is prepare people for the fact that this is a bumpy ride.
Yep.
And the best answer to one of those big speed bumps is to stay straight on the road you're on, calm and settle down and reassure yourself of what's going on. Because if you jump into panic every time you get a speed bump, that flare up can be more intense and last a lot longer. So identifying it and going, I know what this is. It's awful. I don't like it, but I know what it is. I'm going to remain calm and reassure myself that this is temporary. And I always say, sometimes we get, tumbled by the wave. Hang on to the raft. The wave will let you up.
Yep.
So
absolutely right. And I think what you were talking about in terms of having an expectation of how things should go. A lot of times, this is true in medicine, but it's also true in life. I'm a pianist, right? If I practice piano, the more I practice, the better I get. And, in this world, the more that you do something does not equal how much better you get. There were phases where I would be constantly trying to figure out what is wrong with me. Early on, just on WebMD or whatever, trying to figure out what is wrong with me. That's just creating a tremendous amount of anxiety, and I'm problem solving, and it's not solving anything. When I got into the mind body world, I'm trying to make up for lost time. So I'm like listening to your videos every day, like on my walks. I'm listening to all of your stuff. I'm listening to all the Steady Coaches stuff. I'm listening to as much literature.
Double down.
Yeah. And that is just the perfectionist, aspirational A student within me trying to fix the problem. But that's too much. Like, I need to be more like a B plus or even a B minus student, right?
Right.
But when you've been dealing with this issue for so long, your instinct is to be like, I need to save myself. And saving myself in most other worlds, again, NBA playoffs are going right now. The more times that these NBA players practice, the more hours that they put into their career, the better they're going to be. It's rewarded. Oftentimes, hard work and time are deeply rewarded. Mm-hmm. And in the medical field, particularly in chronic unexplained symptoms, it's not the case. I think you need to do a little bit of it, maybe especially early on, to reinforce some of the principles that you talk about in your book or talk about in your videos or those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, if you focus too much on it and your whole life revolves around how to make your symptoms better, that only reinforces what you talk about, which is the perceived danger that you're
belief you're broken. Sure.
Yeah. And that there's a huge problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah. One of the things I tell people often is core concept, you're not broken, you're not sick. So if that's the case and you're spending hours a day trying to apply these mind-body concepts, the brain can only interpret that to mean we're in trouble. We've got a problem. Look at how much time Alex is spending on this stuff.
Yeah.
I always say, how much time would you spend in the garage rebuilding an engine in a brand new car that's working perfectly? You wouldn't.
Not much. Yeah.
So the system is working perfectly. You just have a computer that goes, we got a problem, keep the alarm system on. So we got to get the inputs better consistently to the point where the brain buys it and believes it. And we don't do that through brute force application of mind body concepts. Because people are like, it's not working, let me do more. That's
Yeah.
still not working, let me do even more. And people can become obsessed with it just because
Well,
that's what we do. We're problem solvers. We're
yeah,
trying to solve a
in,
problem.
in what other context would you ever say, oh, something is wrong, let me do less?
I get it.
Almost none, right? Yeah.
Totally counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense,
It's
but it
so,
does when you understand
yeah,
what's going on.
definitely. There's one thing that just, I think a bit of humor that, like, I talk to my therapist about how messed up this is, where the brain creates sensations in your body or
Mhm.
somewhere in your body, and then the brain has the audacity to say something is wrong, we need to fix it, even though the brain is creating the symptoms. It's almost like the boy who cried wolf, right? The
Sure.
boy cries wolf and says, oh my god, there's a huge problem, and then is also the boy saying, somebody come help, there's a problem, and there's no wolf.
Yeah.
And like, in a way, your brain is just working with bad information. And if you want to make it funny, and I think in certain ways, having a humorous touch to things or having a little bit of lightness with it, or even everybody has their own way of dealing with it. Some people, they want like, sometimes I want a nurturing, I want someone to be like, everything's okay, your symptoms are fine. And sometimes I'm just like, dude, shut up. Like, like to my symptoms, being like, what? I'm not falling for that.
Right.
Like, you think that everything is wrong, but I know that everything's fine. So just like, that's funny of you to show up in this moment.
Yeah.
And I think different responses work for different people and also at different times. And you'll, as you recover, or if you have recovered or you're still in recovery, like, viewing it in different ways can be a healthy way of sort of working through it.
Yeah. And as you're talking about that scenario, I just had this thing that, divided mind. Sarno talks about that. Two different parts of the brain. One of it's going, hey, you got this problem. The other one that, here's a problem. Now I got to fix it. It's almost like we've got two parts of the brain. One is the arsonist setting the fire, and then the other one's the firefighter trying to put it out.
100%. Yep.
It's like, and they're not battling. It's just that they're coming from different places. One is an alarm system that's too sensitive, and then their other part is the problem solver trying to figure out how do we shut off these alarms.
Yep.
But it's really it is fascinating, that's for sure. And
That
people
metaphor
don't get
is,
it. People don't get it. They're like, well, why would my brain do this to me if it's trying to keep me safe? Why would it torture me if it's trying to keep me safe? And that's where I come in with it. Well, it's misinformation and fear. It's operating on bad data.
yep. Yeah, it's not on purpose. The brain is actually working perfectly with the tools that it's been given. And right now it's just been given dull, shoddy tools. So
Bad
just
information. Yep.
bad information. Yeah. So I, to tie into kind of where the recovery process went from there for me, I went through a lot of setbacks, went through a lot of ups, a lot of downs. I hadn't flown in a while. Since the flight, I had not gone on a plane. My doctor had sort of recommended that I was anxious about it. And so my doctor was like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't go on a plane for a while. So in May of 2023, I guess this is before, I just want to give sort of a background of like, there are milestone moments that happen throughout this entire process. And then you start to put together like, oh, I can live more normally again.
Sure.
So May 2023, this is still prior to me doing the mind body stuff. I get on a plane for the first time. I start just doing more normal stuff and feeling like very limited, but much less limited than before. So during the fast forward then to 2024, when I really start doing the mind body treatments, I am very, very consciously learning to let go of like what I thought my life was potentially going to be for the rest of time, and then start to actually like do things again that made me feel like a normal person. So I start trying to exercise more. I'd been going on long walks at that point, but I start trying to like go on runs. And it's tough because I'm going on runs and I'm feeling usually pretty crappy, a few hours after or the next day. So again, this is like delayed response, and it's really deflating to do it. So when you're thinking like, oh, well, I could not run and maybe not feel as bad, or I could go on a run and push my body to its natural limitations, but then I'm going to feel it. So then I start, and I had to just work through that and talk with my therapist. It's so demotivating because, again, when you read in Sarno's books, there's nothing physically wrong with me. The things that you need to focus on are internal, psychological, emotional, whatever you want to say. But you're so used to thinking that the body is the enemy, and I need to do everything to preserve the little that I have or what I do have in that moment, that you stop living normally. And that breaking that is what I tried to do. So eventually, as I kind of understand how to approach symptoms, I give them a name. The name for my symptoms is Fluffy Bananas. It was through the Curable program, I think, that they wanted you to give a funny nickname. And my last name, Benias Harris, there was a tennis coach who mispronounced my name 5 days in a row as Bananas. So that was kind of like a joke nickname growing up. So that was one of the words that was on the sheet that I could make. And I just said, well, I do feel like these symptoms are kind of me. So let's call it Bananas. And then Fluffy was just silly. So Fluffy Bananas was the term that I started to give my symptoms when I started to experience them. And I tried to develop a cordial relationship with them, not hatred. And that was really hard because I'm so used to just being like, just stop, please, please stop. And for the record, I still am not perfect. Like, I still deal with setbacks, and my immediate response can sometimes be, oh. But what I try to do, and part of the most important part of recovery, I think, is tightening that window. There's shortening the window from danger response to whatever works for you. If that's indifference, apathy, whatever. Like, if those things help you, and certainly help me, then good. Then we're making progress. So I start tightening that window. I start tightening the window even on when I would do certain activities. There were a lot of times where, and maybe people can relate to this experience if they've gone through something similar, but I would be in specific restaurants or places or landmarks, and I would always remember, like, how was I feeling the last time that I was there? And there were places that I would go where I'd experience a spike, oftentimes like a movie theaters, movies, like pretty stimulating, kind of makes sense, dysregulated nervous system. And I would just sort of track almost and just say, well, maybe it's not as bad as before. Oh, maybe it's a little worse. But again, trying to maintain the thing of, I'm not going to let my symptoms govern my life anymore, because they will consume you. They can suck you in, and your mind can tell you, like, you shouldn't do that anymore. Even though your brain is creating the symptoms, there's also part of your brain that will be like, well, if it means that I won't experience that sensation anymore, I just won't do it. But that's not the way forward.
Meaning avoid the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Avoidance is literally the intuitive first step that people want to take.
Yeah.
I got this symptom on a boat. I'm never getting on a boat again.
Yeah.
Right. But avoidance only teaches the brain that boats are dangerous, that this is dangerous, that that's dangerous. It shrinks your world. It doesn't teach the brain anything other than stay afraid. Yeah.
And I think that what you just said was a huge thing to wrap my mind around, because, doctors that I had seen, especially the ones at Mount Sinai, there was a pamphlet that they gave me either at the beginning or the end of the protocol. And it said on it, like, can I or should I ever go on a boat again? And it's literally in the text says, no, you should never go on a boat again.
Yeah.
Unless you want to feel terrible, you should never go on a boat again. It's not like boats were that important to me. I wasn't a captain. I wasn't a sailor. Like, it wasn't a huge part of my identity. But what was a part of my identity, and what is part of everyone's identity, I think, is feeling limited and not wanting to feel limitations placed on you by the outside world. Nobody wants that. Everyone wants to feel a sense of control or agency and be like, I choose not to go on a boat, rather than the doctor told me not to.
Right.
So I start working with, the mind body stuff, listening to your material, working with Steady Coach, doing my therapy stuff. And eventually we start to get to the point where, if I talk about a traumatic situation from that whole experience, like, boat is number one. But I work, and from working with people, again, like all the resources that I had mentioned, I realized that the boat is not the problem. What is the underlying root cause of what I've been experiencing is my character traits, my childhood, my environment, just that kind of, people have different phrases for it, like stress reservoir, stress bucket, whatever it is. It was too full. And also, I think some people agree or disagree on the root cause, maybe with Sarno stuff in terms of repressed anger and rage. I believe for me that plays a part. Like, I definitely feel when I am enraged or when I am mad, and I have a lot of it just stored up that I'm trying to let go and work through with meditation and journaling and all that kind of stuff. But it just weighs me down spiritually and also physically. I feel when I let that go and I can just find a healthier way to express it, or to understand what is beneath the anger, what it's usually for me, fear or shame in some way. Because when you're angry, you're also ashamed that you're angry, because our society our society condemns anger because it's not a healthy way of expressing whatever it is, a negative emotion. It's unhealthy. That's what people think of it as. And so when you're overly conscientious and a people pleaser and all that kind of stuff, you end up bottling all of other people's things that they did to you over the years and be like, oh, it's fine. I just want you to like me. I just want you to like me. Like, do whatever you want. Like, that's the conversation that goes in your head when you're insecure and you don't set limits. You don't push back. And so eventually then you're like, oh, I have all this stored in my body and in my brain. And I've really felt, as I've tried to work through that has been a huge part of how I have improved over time, through Buddhist literature, through Thich Nhat Hanh, Pema Chodron, Jack Kornfield. I really have enjoyed Tara Brach's Radical Acceptance. That book was really powerful in terms of saying, kind of similar to your oh no and oh well, just this belongs. This sensation can belong here, and it's okay. It's not threatening. It may be uncomfortable, but I can accept it. Again, not liking, just tolerance and acceptance. Huge key.
Yeah.
And
Acceptance, I just want to clarify, acceptance is much different than resigning that this is forever. Acceptance of where you are today
yes,
is much different than, well, I accept that this is my life. No, that's much different. Acceptance is, this is where I am now. I'm angry. I am having symptoms. I'm whatever is happening now. I accept that. Can't change it. Fighting with it doesn't change it. But that doesn't mean you're quitting and giving up and assuming that this will happen for the rest of your life. So I just wanted to clarify that. That's important.
that's absolutely important. I mean, just to tie in a little bit of the previous Mal de Debarquement Syndrome diagnosis, when I looked up the original, the first time I had ever looked it up, I was kind of going through the sensations that they described seemed similar, but I didn't know. But until I was actually formally diagnosed by the neurologist, there was one line in that really psyched me out. First of all, there were a few. One of them was, this is 90% in women and 90% in women over 40. So I'm like, well, I'm a guy who's 29 years old. If this is me, how broken must I be?
Wow.
Add on top of that the last line said, if it doesn't go away within a year, you may deal with it for the rest of your life.
Don't you
mean,
love those predictions? Predictions of doom. And no disrespect to the medical profession at all, but anytime they say there's no cure, it means they don't know how to cure it.
yeah,
It doesn't mean you can't get better. It just means that it's not within their realm of training and expertise. So they decide to say, well, you'll have it forever. It's no different than fibromyalgia. We don't know what causes it, and there's no cure. People are getting better with this mind body work from fibro all the time.
yeah,
So just because a doctor doesn't have it. So anytime somebody says it's not curable, learn to live with it. It's time to say, just watch me. I'll get better.
yeah,
Find a different doctor, find a different approach, exhaust all your medical options, but then turn to what is actually working for a lot of people, which is the mind body world.
yeah. Yeah, I've read a lot online, and sometimes you'll go into these, Reddit threads and other things of people who poo-poo mind body stuff because they say, oh, well, I have a disc bulge or I have this or that. And so whatever he says is BS. It's like, I don't think anyone who's rational, who's in this world says that like mind body treatments can help absolutely everyone, but they can help a tremendous amount of people who've gotten answers and the answers don't add up, or there's no real conclusion. With disembarkment syndrome, Mal de Debarquement Syndrome, it's a symptomatic diagnosis. That means that the only explanation of what you have when they give you the diagnosis, it's just explaining what the symptoms are without attributing root cause. So for me, they don't know what causes it. They're just saying that I'm feeling.
The label for the symptoms, that's all it is.
Yeah, and that's the information that they're working off of. But I think I don't know where I choose to spend my time focused on, but there's a part of me that wants to call the practitioners that I worked with in the previous phase and just say, not in a mean way. I mean, if I were truly being direct, I'd be like, you're wasting your damn time. Like with these physical things. The reality is there are some people who actually benefit tremendously from there are some people who do TMS and like their symptoms go away. So I don't really want to tell them that all of it is wrong, but in so many instances, it feels like there are people who are just not getting better and they just get caught in this ecosystem of, well, you're in the system. And in our medical world, I still believe in it in so many instances, but I am a little bit more cynical about certain doctors trying to prescribe really expensive, innovative treatments, even though they probably won't work for most people, just because people are desperate. I was so desperate. I mean, without my family's generosity of helping me with my medical bills, I wouldn't have been able to do it. I'd be in medical debt because of how much it costs. And when you're so desperate, you'll try absolutely anything. Yeah. But I think that stubbornness and hope to fix the problem aided me in the long term in making me find your work, finding Sarno, finding Alan Gordon, Steady Coach, etc. Without that, I don't know where I would be.
Well, you've exhausted everything else.
Yeah.
You literally
that stubbornness. I was stubborn,
It's not stubborn. It was also just unawares that there's another explanation for what's going on.
Yeah.
That's really it. It's like, you don't hear, and I have people say all the time, how come my doctor didn't tell me about this? It's because it's not taught in medical school.
They don't know.
It's not a standard, practice.
Yep. I talked to my brother. My brother's a psychiatrist in New York. And he went to Columbia Med School, one of the best med schools in the world. And I asked him if they taught anything related to mind-body symptoms or this kind of stuff. And basically nothing. Oh. I mean, he was pretty new to this world of medicine, and he early on was a tremendous resource, like an incredible friend and brother to me when the symptoms started. Mm-hmm. But he didn't know. I mean, all he was working off of was what MdDS, which is what the neurologist told me. So he was trying to get me plugged in. Like, he's the one who connected me to Mount Sinai for the clinic to go there. So like all helpful stuff, But he didn't know about the mind body stuff until I found it. And then we talked about it. And now that he's a psychiatrist, like he's pretty interested. I don't know if he's going to apply it in his clinic or not, but like, I think he buys it. And I think what's not to buy? If there are results, this must be true, at least for a good amount of people. I'm sure a lot of people in your community would vouch for your treatments, and your mindset about mind body stuff has been just like giving them their life back. And I can say the same for myself.
And I hear that, I don't even know how many times. Dan, you saved my life. And it's one of the most humbling things to hear.
Yeah.
Because I'm just a guy shooting videos in my backyard and on my couch, you know?
Yeah.
But it is really incredible how well this stuff can work.
Yeah.
And there's people who are poo-pooing the work I'm doing and saying, oh, Dan, this can't work for everything. I didn't say it works for everything, but it's kind of formulaic.
Yeah.
Am I dying? No. Okay. If you're dying, go to the hospital, right? But
Yeah.
am I dying? No. Is there anything critical going on? No, I'm dizzy as heck, but I'm like, the doctors can't find anything. They can't explain it. So clearly I'm not dying. So now let me rule in this mind body stuff. And if it looks and smells like TMS, perceived danger, then that's what it is. And the good news is there's a solution.
Yeah.
Because in my view, it's misinformation and fear creating false alarms. And we can reverse that with the correct information and neutralizing the fear with the accurate data of what's actually happening.
Yep.
It's not as complicated as people think it is.
No. To come full circle with where I started and where I am now, like for me, the trigger point was the boat. So I'd always feared like going on a boat, and I thought I'll never go on a boat again. And I'd resigned myself to that and being okay with it. I had accepted that. And eventually, like we had talked about with my doctors, they basically were saying, and when I say doctors, I mean like mind body practitioners, that the root cause wasn't the boat. It was all those other things. So going on a boat is actually perfectly safe. It's about your fear of the boat and about your fear of symptoms coming back that is the key. So
Yeah, for sure.
they were like, they basically said, don't do it if you don't want to do it. You can totally do it if you want, but there's no pressure to. But just know that it in and of itself is not going to be the reason that you have a setback.
No, it's the fear of getting on the boat. And it's the catastrophic thinking while you're on the boat. And it's the worry when you get off the boat. It's like, It's the stories we're telling ourselves.
100%. So fast forward a little bit to, this is probably 5 or 6 months ago. I had a dream or a vision of some kind. I'm a musician. That's my job. And,
Awesome.
part of this recovery process for me, early on, I wasn't doing any music at all. And that was really soul sucking for me. Obviously losing work is stressful.
Not
Also
even practice at home?
Well, I didn't practice for like a month.
Okay.
And then even through then it was like minimal, because a lot of times I'd sit at the piano and I just feel like the piano's shaking and I just wouldn't want to do it. And when you're in that state of mind, also writing music is impossible. Like playing is one thing because you're kind of a technician and you keep your mind off of things, but like creating and composing music like I do, you need to be able to tap into emotions and see them for what they are. And when you're in total panic, it's really hard to write anything, much less anything that you enjoy. So over the course of this recovery, as I start to improve, I start writing songs, each of which become a direct root, or like are directly attributed to a certain part of the process. So one of them is like Meet the Ocean, the first song. And then there's one about the sensations that I felt when I got off the boat. And this is all like instrumental music. There's no words, but this is how it sounds to me.
Cool.
And then there's a song I write when my grandpa passed away, when my symptoms were at their worst. So I wrote a song that I had dedicated to him. And I had a vision for what I wanted this visual to look like for the album cover. And I saw it in my brain and I just said, I need to get on a boat for the first time. And that's going to be my album cover, because I want to capture me standing up in the face of it while also showing the isolation that I felt from people not understanding what I have. Even to this day, I've only met 2 people in the flesh who have my condition.
Sure.
It's still alienating. I mean, even though I'm doing so much better and I'm I've made a lot of headway in my recovery, it still feels isolating to explain to people this is what I've experienced when someone else can't be like, oh, I totally get it. And so I was nervous about going on a boat, but I figured this was the perfect opportunity for me to do it. It just made sense in terms of my recovery being like, well, if I can do this, then I can do anything.
Sure.
And so I find there's a lake just about an hour north of LA. I go with Emily and my photographer, and I rent a boat, go out on this boat and stand up. And she got a perfect shot. And it captured like exactly what I wanted because it shows me kind of standing up in the boat while being completely surrounded by water.
Defiantly.
And defiantly, yeah. Yeah, because it was really an FU to my to all of it, you know? To really being like, again, I have no beef. There's nothing personal about it, but like when you're told over and over again that you can't do something and it's not rooted in anything except misinformation, then when you do it, and for the record, after it happened, I was so excited. Then the night of, it was the night of the Oscars, and I was at an Oscar party with friends. We were talking about whatever. I go home, and then I'm like, delayed, the activity hangover. Yeah. Is it going to be bad? And then I'm starting to worry, is this going to trigger later? The next day goes by, nothing changed. Next day goes by, nothing changed. And I'm like, I think I'm good. And that was huge for me. Awesome. Now, since then, like at that point, I was probably fluctuating between like a 0 and a 2 on symptoms. And keep in mind that for a year, I was at a 7 to a 10. For about 4 months, I was at like a 4 to 6, and then went back to about a 7. And then with PRT, EMDR, IFS, all the mind body stuff got down to a 0 to a 2. So like that's huge progress. And there are times when I'm like, I just want to be a 0. And I do. There are some times when I don't even notice it. Other times I do. And I think where I'm at, I'm still just working on not every time that symptom comes on or I have a setback, like a month ago, actually, yeah, a month and a half ago, I was at a wedding. I was awake at night. I was just like anxious about my life. I was just like, what am I doing with my life? Where am I at? This whole experience has set me back in my career. I lost a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of bands that I'm like not really playing with anymore. They're just things. I just was stressed. The weight of the world was on me. And I felt in that moment like, oh, something's coming on. And then it caused like a few days of just like terrible sleep. Again, I sleep well most of the time, so this was unusual for me. And then after that, I remember distinctly saying like, well, as bad as not having enough sleep is, it's a lot better than having instability. The next day, I just have a huge setback of instability. It's almost like my brain knew like there's something going on. Yeah.
You planted the seed of how bad that was. It remembered, the brain perceived danger, turned it on. It's not your fault. It's just natural to have these thoughts.
Yeah.
And we cannot stop the instant reaction of, oh crap. Just like I say, we can't stop the default response of ouch when it's pain.
Yeah.
What we do next is your power. What we do next is your opportunity to go, oh, I know what that is. Not going to panic.
Yeah.
But the ouch, it's instant. You're going to feel that. The, oh shit, when you get dizzy, you're going to feel that. But I know what it is. I know how to respond now. So in my view, recovery is when you know what it is and no longer fuel the fear. I call it recovery from fear is when we're recovered.
Yeah.
Right. More so than I never get a symptom ever.
I think the more that I listen to people who experience this journey, almost all of them have resigned themselves to the fact that like they're okay if symptoms come back. And I remembered early on when I would listen to people talk about, well, I don't really have symptoms anymore, but I'm also like not really trying to get rid of them anymore. I was just like, that's so dumb. Why wouldn't you want to be trying to get rid of them? Because they're terrible and they're horrible. And now being on the other side of it, that is like kind of the goal. That
Yeah.
you're just outcome independent
Well,
and just you're
the
okay
key
with it.
point to remember is it's not like you go through this process, the symptoms go away, you get to a zero, and the brain stops doing its job of keeping an eye out for danger. The brain reserves the right to raise a red flag, turn on a symptom if it perceives danger. Could be a new symptom, could be the old symptom. The brain's not going to quit doing its job.
Yep.
And so the key is you're recovered when you know what it is, you know how to respond, and you respond consistently. And then you don't get into chronic symptoms. So myself, I once in a while will get a little twinge in the back. Nicole Sachs has symptoms from time to time. Dr. Howard Schubner has symptoms reasonably often. None of us have chronic symptoms. I'll get a little
Yeah.
back twinge. It lasts for an hour. You know how much I care about that? Zero. It doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, and you have perspective on it because for all the years, what was it, 13 years that you had dealt with?
Sure.
Like, that's an hour is nothing.
Right. And the longest duration I had was when mom had a stroke and I'm sitting bedside with her as I'm watching her struggle and advocating for her care. I had 10 days of back pain. That's still not chronic.
No.
I gave it little fear, little attention. I knew what it was. I connected the dots on the emotional response of watching mom go through a stroke and the recovery, and it went away. So, for anybody who thinks once I get better, I never have to deal with this again for the rest of my life, that's an illusion
Yeah.
because the brain still is doing its job by keeping an eye out for danger. And symptoms coming back doesn't mean it's a mistake or a failure on your part. It just means your brain's perceiving some danger. And what do? You do what you did the first time to make it go away. Don't panic. You
Yeah.
know what it is, you know how to respond. Perfect.
I
But some
experience
people lose their mind when the symptoms come back.
Me too. I mean, I do too. Like I'm human, as
Of course.
even though I've gotten so much better and
Mhm.
I try to be a resource for people who reach out, whether it's the music that I release or whether it's just online. I've done other interviews where I talk about my experience and people
Mhm.
reach out and like they want me to be a beacon of hope, I guess. Like even I go through the same downs that everybody else does. I'm no different. What I've improved at is just again the window of fear and the window. It's sort of like turning into just tolerant, like
Mhm.
hatred to tolerant. Like I hate this. I don't want this to happen right now. All right. Oh well. Oh no. Oh well.
Yeah.
Back to that. At its simplest,
Short and simple.
yep, I'm big into simple things, whatever works for you. Like in Tara Brach's Radical Acceptance, she has a whole thing where it's a meditation where she just says like yes and just says yes and just lean into the sensations and the experiences that you have in this moment. And by saying yes, she does it in contrast with no. So she'll say no, 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 and you'll see how your body responds. And for me, a lot of my stress and tension is stored in my solar plexus.
Yeah.
And so I just feel it closing off when I say no.
Yeah.
And when I say yes, it just opens up. It's the way that you approach it. It's just so simple, but it really can help. And, I hope wherever, if you're a person who's recovered or you are recovering right now, just know, I'd say probably my greatest bit of advice on top of what I've already said is just don't put a timeline on anything.
Exactly.
Don't rush this process because this is all leads back to one of my favorite books I've ever read, which is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I have Holocaust survivors in my family. My grandmother was on Schindler's List, and that subject matter is really personal to me. And reading his book, I remember obviously seeing it and sort of seeing it through a lens of like my grandmother's experience, but also learning through his. And he would talk about observing Holocaust survivors. And I think one of them that he used as an anecdote was a survivor who was saying like, oh, by Christmas Day, we're going to be liberated.
Right.
And Christmas Day comes and guess what?
They
The
weren't.
camp is not liberated. a few days later he dies.
Right.
And I'm not going that severe and saying that like if you think your symptoms will be gone by Christmas and they're not, then that. But my point is, it's not about death. It's about the you just can't rush this natural process.
Yeah.
You will only the only thing you'll do with that is put pressure on yourself, and you'll feel like more of a failure and more broken because you're like, well, I thought that I was going to be okay by this date. And the fact that I'm not means that something is wrong. And that only reinforces the perceived danger that things are going to get worse.
Yeah. Pressure is not good. So we're going to need to wrap this up. Is there anything else that you'd really want to convey before we log off here?
Yeah.
Any last words? What else you got?
I think the last things that I would say are I'm someone who dealt a lot with kind of feeling less than, almost, self on the edge of self-loathing, like when I was younger, and I've understood this through therapy and looking at myself. And a huge part of this process is just being kind to yourself. And I didn't really ever have a huge well that I could lean into. It's not like I actively was always thought that I was in the wrong, but there were a lot of times where I assumed that I did something wrong, or I messed it up, or I didn't do well, or it's like, oh, this is so like me. So when you get into it, it's a trait that I think gets people into the situation that we're at with mind body symptoms, but then that is also part of what perpetuates it. So a lot of this is, there are some people who have these character traits like catastrophizing and self-loathing or self-dislike, whatever you want to call it. And those lead us to chronic symptoms, to the symptoms themselves, but they also perpetuate those symptoms. So I think cultivating some form of self-compassion, and maybe even on top of that, recent resources during my most recent setback, I really enjoyed Eckhart Tolle's work on spirituality. And he sort of goes a level above, and it's sort of like, let's be more like a cat or more like a dog. They just are. They don't posit, oh, well, I'm getting older and therefore I'm broken, or like there's something wrong with me. It's like the cat's just experiencing life and their sensations. They're just beings. We spend so much time as human thinkings because we're being creatures who become thinkers. So why don't we switch that again and try to be more and think less? Like not construct a narrative. And that would be probably the last thing that I would say, and parlay that into, for me, what kind of helped, even though it sounds bad. A lot of people will just say like, oh, this is in your head. This is psychosomatic, whatever.
Not true.
Not true. But for me, for some reason, I felt like knowing that my character traits and my environment and all of these things, I had thought for a while the boat was the demon. I thought the motion sickness was the demon. So I'm like, how do I get myself out of that? I already did it. It's too late. Weirdly, for me, it was liberating to feel like my traits and the things and who I was as a person and my upbringing and all that kind of stuff, and my environment and my work and all that stuff led me into this. That actually gave me great optimism and hope that like, well, if all that got me here, then like, of course I can get myself out. Because it's all about changing my approach to life and trying to find just a healthier relationship with myself. And I think that all those things together have led to a severe, an extreme drop in symptoms, where these days, post setback from a month and a half ago, I'm like back to about between a 0 and a 2. And I am still, it's day to day, but like my life is so much better. And I'm really grateful to you and the work that you've done. There were days when I'd go on walks and I would listen to your new video every day. And, I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful to Steady Coach and Dr. Sarno and Nicole Saxon, all of you who work in this field. Like you changed my life for the better. So thank you.
So I appreciate it. You're very welcome. I mean, like I said, I'm blessed to be able to do this. So, all right, Alex, we're going to wrap this one up. We've been talking a little while, but wonderful stuff, great insights. I loved hearing it because we hadn't really spoken before, so I didn't know your journey too well or much at all. So I love it. The dizziness stuff is one of those areas where the people with it are convinced it's different. I wish I had pain instead of dizziness. And, it's really
I've
great.
been there.
It's really great to add yet another dizziness success story of somebody who's able to successfully teach the brain that I'm not broken. I'm really okay.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming on, volunteering your story.
Of
And
course.
if I can ever do anything for you, you know where to find me.
Thank you.
Otherwise, so long and wave to the camera. See
Take
ya.
care.